Woman dumps ugly kitten at shelter. Vet opens the box and freezes in disbelief. The cardboard box hit the counter with a wet thud that echoed through the empty reception area of Millbrook Creek Animal Shelter. Rain drummed against the windows, turning the October afternoon into a blur of grey and gold as dying leaves plastered themselves against the glass. Maris Thorne looked up from her computer screen, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as she took in the woman standing before her. Designer rain jacket, perfectly manicured nails, face set in an expression that somehow managed to combine disgust and impatience. "Take it," the woman said, already backing toward the door. "I can't sell it like this." Maris stood slowly, her knees protesting after 3 hours of paperwork. At 43, she felt every minute of the 14-hour days she'd been pulling to keep this place afloat. The shelter's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, another expense she couldn't afford to fix, casting strange shadows across the stained linoleum floor. "Ma'am, if you could just fill out the surrender form." "No forms, no names, just take it." The woman's voice had an edge sharp enough to cut. "It's defective anyway. No one will want it." Before Maris could respond, the woman was gone, the glass door swinging shut behind her with a pneumatic hiss. Through the rain-streaked window, Maris watched a silver BMW pull away, its taillights disappearing into the storm. She turned back to the box, noting how the cardboard had gone soft with moisture, how something inside shifted with a sound barely louder than breathing. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the flaps. The smell hit her first, unwashed fur, the sour tang of fear, something else underneath that made her veterinary instincts prickle with concern. Then she saw him, and her breath caught in her throat so sharply it hurt. The kitten couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, small enough to fit in her cupped palms. His coat was a riot of colors, patches of orange like October pumpkins, midnight black that seemed to absorb light, and white as clean as fresh snow. A calico and male at that, rare enough to make breeders salivate. But it wasn't the coloring that made Maris freeze, her fingers hovering just above the trembling body. It was his eyes. The right one gleamed bright green, intelligent and aware, tracking her movements with an intensity that seemed almost human. But the left eye was clouded over, milky white like curdled cream, the pupil barely visible beneath the opacity. The eyelid drooped slightly, and she could see the inflamed tissue around it, red and weeping. The asymmetry was jarring, unsettling in a way that bypassed rational thought and went straight to some primal place where imperfection registered as wrongness. "Oh, sweetheart," Maris whispered, and the kitten's good ear swiveled toward her voice. She'd seen thousands of animals in her 17 years as a veterinarian, had worked through euthanasia lists at overcrowded city shelters before burning out and retreating to this small Oregon town. She'd held dying puppies and comforted owners through impossible decisions. She'd seen cruelty in its many forms, neglect that made her stomach turn, indifference that was somehow worse than active malice. But something about this moment felt different, weighted with a significance she couldn't name. The kitten made a sound, not quite a meow, more like a question rendered in feline. His whole body vibrated with it, and Maris noticed how he compensated for his blind side, turning his head at an exaggerated angle to keep her in view with his good eye. Even now, soaked and terrified and abandoned, there was something deliberate about his movements, a consciousness that made her think of the word person rather than pet. She lifted him carefully, supporting his hindquarters as she'd done 10,000 times before. He didn't resist, but she felt the tension in his small body, every muscle coiled and ready. His heart hammered against her palm like a tiny drum, rapid fire and desperate. When she brought him closer, he didn't try to hide or burrow into her scrubs. Instead, he stared at her with that one perfect eye, and she had the absurd sensation of being evaluated, measured, judged. "You're going to be trouble," she said softly. "I can already tell." The exam room smelled of disinfectant and the lingering sweetness of the treats she kept in her pocket for anxious patients. Maris set the kitten on the stainless steel table, feeling him flinch at the cold surface. She worked methodically, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of long experience, temperature slightly elevated, weight dangerously low, barely 1.5 pounds, ribs visible beneath the matted fur, signs of malnutrition, probably weaned too early. And that eye, that clouded, ruined eye that would require examination equipment she didn't have in this bare-bones facility. But it was when she ran her handheld scanner over his shoulders that everything shifted. The device beeped, and Maris froze. Microchips weren't uncommon, but in a kitten this young, from a woman who'd refused to leave her name. She checked the number twice, then 3 times, her pulse quickening as she pulled up the database on her phone. The registration made her stomach drop. The chip belonged to Isolde Park, listed under a cattery called Whispering Pines, located right here in Millbrook Creek. But Whispering Pines hadn't existed for 5 years, not since the fire that had destroyed the facility and decimated Isolde's decades-long breeding program. Maris knew, because everyone in town knew, it had been the kind of tragedy that became part of local lore, whispered about in the aisles of the grocery store, and discussed over coffee at Merritt's Diner. The kitten, she couldn't keep thinking of him as the kitten, he needed a name, made that questioning sound again. This time it sounded almost impatient, as if he was wondering why she'd gone still, why her hands had stopped their gentle examination. "Dashiell," she said suddenly, the name arriving fully formed in her mind. She didn't know where it came from, only that it fit. "Your name is Dashiell," Dashiell responded by attempting to stand on wobbly legs, then promptly miscalculating the distance to the edge of the table. Maris caught him just before he tumbled off, her heart leaping into her throat. He didn't seem bothered by the near fall, just blinked up at her with his good eye as if to say, "I meant to do that." Despite everything, the rain, the mysterious woman, the microchip that shouldn't exist, the eye that would require surgery they couldn't afford, Maris smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd managed in weeks, maybe months. The shelter was drowning in debt, adoption rates were down, and the county had started making noises about consolidation that really meant closure. She should take Dashiell to the recovery kennels, add him to the list of animals waiting for homes that might never come, and get back to the mountain of paperwork threatening to bury her. Instead, she found herself wrapping him in a clean towel, tucking him against her chest where he could hear her heartbeat. He settled immediately, that rapid-fire pulse slowing just slightly, and she felt the faint rumble of a purr that seemed far too big for such a small body. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the parking lot into a lake that reflected the darkening sky. Through the window, Maris could see the lights of Millbrook Creek proper, the small Oregon town where she'd sought refuge from the relentless pace of Portland veterinary medicine. The town where nothing much happened, where seasons passed in predictable rhythms, where she'd convinced herself she could build something stable and lasting. The town where Isolde Park lived in self-imposed isolation on the hill above the old library. A woman who'd sworn never to touch a cat again after the fire that had taken everything. Dashiell shifted against her, his claws catching in the fabric of her scrubs, and Maris made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. She would call Isolde. She would figure out how a supposedly sterile microchip had ended up in a kitten too young to have existed 5 years ago. She would get that eye treated. Adoption be damned. She would do all of this because something about Dashiell's mismatched gaze made her think of her own reflection. Flawed, damaged in ways that didn't always show, still hoping that imperfection wasn't the same as unworthiness. The shelter's back door creaked open, admitting a gust of wind that scattered papers across her desk. Cormac Brennan stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his silver hair, a stack of wooden transport crates balanced on his shoulder. The 61-year-old carpenter made deliveries every other Tuesday, had done so for 3 years now, ever since his wife's passing had left him searching for something to fill the hours. He never stayed long, never made small talk, just dropped off whatever the shelter needed and disappeared back to his workshop that smelled of cedar and loss. But today, Cormac paused, his faded blue eyes catching on the bundle in Maris's arms. New arrival? His voice was rough from disuse, like a door that rarely opened. Someone dumped him. Calico male with a damaged eye. Maris adjusted the towel so Cormac could see Dashiell's face, that strange asymmetrical beauty that had frozen her in place. Something shifted in Cormac's expression, so subtle she almost missed it. He set the crates down with careful precision, then moved closer, his weathered hands hovering near Dashiell but not quite touching. The kitten turned his head, tracking the new presence, and for a long moment the old carpenter and the damaged kitten regarded each other with identical wariness. "He's a fighter," Cormac said finally, "can see it in how he holds himself. He's going to need surgery, maybe sooner rather than later, if that eye gets infected." Maris heard the defeat in her own voice. "We don't have the budget for it." Cormac nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on Dashiell. "My granddaughter Willa. She comes by on Saturdays. Helps me in the workshop. He paused, seemed to be working through something difficult. She's been asking to volunteer here, says she wants to work with animals when she grows up. She's welcome any time, Maris said, surprised by the offer. Cormac rarely spoke of his granddaughter, the 9-year-old girl who'd become his only regular visitor after his wife's funeral. I'll bring her this weekend. Cormac straightened, picked up his empty dolly. Then, almost as an afterthought, that kitten. Don't give up on him too quick. Before Maris could respond, he was gone, the door swinging shut with its characteristic groan. Through the window, she watched his old Ford truck navigate the flooded parking lot, tail lights blurring in the rain. Dashiell chose that moment to dig his tiny claws into her collarbone, not aggressive but insistent, reminding her of his presence. When she looked down, he was staring up at her with his good eye, and she had the strangest sensation that he understood far more than any 8-week-old kitten should, that he knew this was the beginning of something neither of them could control, a story already set in motion by forces beyond their comprehension. The shelter settled into its evening quiet, the sounds of animals bedding down for the night, creating a symphony of small movements and soft breathing. Maris carried Dashiell to her office, a cramped space cluttered with filing cabinets and outdated equipment. She should put him in the kitten room with the others, follow protocol, maintain professional distance. Instead, she made a nest from her spare sweatshirt and set it in the bottom drawer of her desk. Dashiell circled 3 times that universal feline ritual, then curled into a tight ball with his tail over his nose. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out, the sleep of the very young and very exhausted. Maris pulled out her phone and stared at the contact she hadn't used in 5 years. Isolde Park's number, saved from back when she'd first moved to Millbrook Creek and had introduced herself to all the local animal people. They'd met exactly once, a brief conversation at the farmer's market that had ended with Isolde's polite but firm rebuff of any friendship overtures. Her finger hovered over the call button. Outside, lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the Douglas firs that surrounded the shelter property. Thunder followed seconds later, close enough to rattle the windows. Dashiell slept on, oblivious to the storm, to the mysteries surrounding his origins, to the future that waited with all its impossible obstacles. In the drawer's darkness, with only his white patches visible, he looked like any other kitten. Small, vulnerable, ordinary. But Maris knew better. She'd seen that green eye. Bright with intelligence and something else, something that looked uncomfortably like determination. She'd felt the strength in that tiny body, the refusal to be diminished by circumstance or imperfection. She pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Maris was about to hang up when the line clicked open. Yes? Isolde Park's voice was exactly as she remembered, crisp, educated, with an undertone of steel that suggested she did not appreciate unexpected calls. Ms. Park, this is Maris Thorne from the Millbrook Creek Animal Shelter. I'm sorry to disturb you, but something's happened that I think you need to know about. Silence stretched across the line. Maris could hear her own heartbeat, the rain against the windows, Dashiell's tiny snores from the drawer. I don't do cats anymore, Dr. Thorne, Isolde said finally. Whatever you're calling about, I can't help. A kitten was abandoned here today. Male calico, approximately 8 weeks old. He has your microchip. The silence this time was different, charged with something that might have been shock or might have been fear. That's impossible, Isolde whispered. All my cats were lost in the fire. Every single one. I know, but I'm looking at the registration right now. Whispering Pines Cattery registered to you 5 years ago. Another long pause. Then, what does he look like? Maris described Dashiell in detail. The calico patches, the clouded eye, the way he moved with his head tilted to compensate for his blind side. As she spoke, she heard something that might have been a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Keep him safe, Isolde said abruptly. Don't let anyone adopt him. Don't put his picture online. I'll come by tomorrow morning. Ms. Park. But the line was already dead. Maris set her phone down slowly, her mind racing through possibilities, none of them making sense. She looked at the drawer where Dashiell slept, this impossible kitten with his impossible microchip, and felt the weight of something vast and complex settling onto her shoulders. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling through the eaves of the old building. Somewhere in the kennel area, a dog barked once, then settled. The clock on the wall ticked past 7. past 8, marking time while Maris sat in her chair and tried to piece together a puzzle with too many missing pieces. She must have dozed off eventually, exhaustion winning out over anxiety. When she jerked awake, her neck protesting the awkward angle, the storm had passed. Moonlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The drawer was open. Dashiell stood on her desk, silhouetted against the window, his small body tense as he stared out at something she couldn't see. His ears were forward, his tail puffed to twice its normal size, and even from where she sat, Maris could see the rigid alertness in every line of him. "What is it?" she whispered. He turned his head, that asymmetrical face catching the moonlight, and made a sound unlike anything she'd heard from him before, low and urgent, somewhere between a warning and a question. Maris stood and moved to the window, following his gaze. At first she saw nothing unusual, just the parking lot, the trees beyond, the two-lane road that wound through town. Then movement caught her eye, a figure standing at the edge of the property, just barely visible in the shadows where the security light didn't reach. A woman watching the building. Even from this distance, even in the darkness, something about her posture seemed familiar. The same expensive rain jacket, though the rain had stopped hours ago. The same rigid stance that spoke of anger or determination or both. The woman who'd brought Dashiell. Before we continue with the story, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support truly helps keep this channel alive and growing. The figure stood motionless for another minute, maybe 2. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. Maris heard an engine start somewhere in the distance, saw headlights sweep across the trees before fading into the night. When she looked back at Dashiell, he was still tense, still staring at the spot where the woman had been. His good eye was wide and dark in the moonlight, and she would have sworn she saw something in it that looked like recognition, or perhaps fear. "Who was she?" Maris asked, even though she knew he couldn't answer. "And why did she really bring you here?" Dashiell finally relaxed, his fur smoothing back down, his tail uncurling. He walked across the desk to where she stood, butted his head against her hand with surprising force and purred. But even the purr sounded different now. Less contentment, more relief. Maris scooped him up and carried him back to the drawer, settling him into the sweatshirt nest. This time she didn't close the drawer, just left it cracked, so he could come and go as he pleased. He watched her with his green eye as she pulled out her phone and started typing notes. Everything she could remember about the woman, the time she'd arrived, the make and model of her car. By the time dawn broke over Millbrook Creek, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold, Maris had made several decisions. She would document everything. She would be at the shelter when Isolde arrived. She would get Dashiell the medical care he needed, budget be damned, and she would find out the truth about this impossible kitten with his impossible microchip and his too intelligent eye, because something was very wrong here, and Dashiell was at the center of it. The morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of October day that made the remaining leaves glow like stained glass against a crystalline sky. Maris had gone home long enough to shower and change, leaving Dashiell in the office with food, water, and a makeshift litter box. When she returned at 7, she found him perched on the windowsill, watching the parking lot with the intensity of a much older cat. The shelter came alive around them, volunteers arriving to feed and walk the dogs, the first stirrings of the cats in their communal rooms, the familiar rhythm of a place dedicated to second chances. Jenny, the college student who worked mornings, poked her head into the office to ask about the new arrival, and Maris gave her the abbreviated version, leaving out microchips and midnight watches and everything that didn't fit neatly into shelter protocol. At 9 o'clock precisely, a vintage Mercedes pulled into the parking lot. Maris recognized it immediately. Everyone in Millbrook Creek knew Isolde Park's car, though they rarely saw it venture into town. The woman who emerged moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned to carry grief like a physical weight. Isolde Park at 74 was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty. Silver hair pulled back in an elegant twist, clothes that spoke of old money and older taste, a bearing that suggested she'd been someone important once and hadn't quite forgotten. But it was her eyes that caught Maris's attention. Sharp and assessing, yes, but also haunted, carrying shadows that hadn't faded in 5 years. Maris met her at the door, Dashiell cradled carefully in her arms. She'd wrapped him in a clean towel, his head poking out like a turtle from its shell. Isolde stopped 3 feet away, her eyes locking onto Dashiell with an intensity that made Maris take an instinctive step back. The older woman's face had gone absolutely white, her lips pressed together so hard they'd disappeared. "It's not possible," Isolde breathed. "It's absolutely not possible. But you recognize the pattern." It wasn't a question. "I bred calicos for 40 years, Dr. Thorne. Developed 3 distinct lines, each with characteristic markings. That," she pointed at Dashiell with a trembling finger, "that is a Whispering Pines cat. The distribution of colors, the white blaze on the chest, even the shape of the patches. I'd stake my reputation on it." "Your reputation as a breeder who lost everything in a fire 5 years ago?" Isolde's jaw tightened. "May I?" She gestured toward Dashiell. Maris hesitated, then handed him over. Dashiell went without protest, which surprised her. He'd been fussy all morning, hissing at Jenny and refusing to eat. But in Isolde's practiced hands, he settled immediately, as if recognizing something familiar in her touch. Isolde examined him with the methodical precision of decades of experience. She checked his teeth, felt his bone structure, ran her fingers through his fur to assess texture and density. When she reached his damaged eye, she paused, her expression softening in a way that transformed her entire face. "Corneal scarring," she murmured, "probably from an early infection left untreated. The eye itself might be salvageable, but more likely it's causing him pain. He'll need surgery." "I know, I just don't have the funds right now." Isolde looked up sharply. "What's your budget situation?" Maris laughed, the sound hollow even to her own ears. "We're 3 months behind on the building lease. County's talking about shutting us down. I can barely afford to feed the animals we have, let alone pay for specialized surgery. And yet you're not planning to euthanize him." "No." The word came out fiercer than Maris intended. "No, I'm not." Something shifted in Isolde's expression, a crack appearing in that carefully maintained facade. She looked down at Dashiell, who gazed back with his good eye, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away, leaving behind someone softer and sadder. "There were 23 cats in the fire," Isolde said quietly. "Queens, studs, kittens. I tried to save them. I ran into that building 4 times before the fire department physically restrained me. I could hear them screaming." She paused, swallowed hard. "I haven't touched a cat since that night. Couldn't bear to. Every time I see one, I hear those screams." Maris didn't know what to say to that. What could anyone say to that kind of loss? "But this kitten," Isolde continued, "he can't exist. All my breeding records were destroyed. All my cats died. The cattery was bulldozed and the land sold. There's no possible way—" "Unless someone had access to your breeding stock before the fire," Maris interrupted. "Unless someone took something. Embryos, maybe? Genetic material?" Isolde's face went from white to grey. "I had a veterinary clinic do reproductive work for me. Dr. Raymond Hart, about 30 miles from here. When I closed Whispering Pines, I told him to destroy everything. Signed forms, witnessed, legally binding. Did you verify that he did it?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Isolde set Dashiell carefully on the reception desk, her hands shaking visibly now. The kitten sat perfectly still, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, his gaze moving between the 2 women like he was following a conversation. "I need to make some phone calls," Isolde said finally. "And I need to think. But Dr. Thorne—" She fixed Maris with a look that brooked no argument. "Don't let anyone adopt him. Don't put his picture anywhere online. Don't tell anyone about the microchip. Something is very wrong here. And until we figure out what, that kitten is in danger." "What kind of danger?" "I don't know yet, but male calicos are rare enough to be valuable." "A male calico from a championship bloodline?" Isolde shook her head. "There are people who would pay thousands for him. Tens of thousands if they knew his lineage. The woman who brought him said he was defective. Too ugly to sell. Then she's either ignorant or lying." Isolde reached out and touched Dashiell's head gently just once, then pulled back as if she'd been burned. "I'll pay for his surgery, whatever it costs, and I'll help you figure out where he came from. But in return, I need you to promise me you'll keep him safe." "I promise." Isolde nodded once, sharply, and turned toward the door. Then she paused, looked back over her shoulder. "Dr. Thorne, what did you name him?" "Dashiell." "Dashiell," Isolde repeated, testing the word. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "That's a good name. A strong name." Then she was gone, the Mercedes pulling away with the careful speed of someone who'd learned that rushing never helped anything. Maris picked up Dashiell, cradling him against her chest. He purred immediately, that too big rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his tiny body should contain. "What have you gotten us into?" she whispered. Dashiell just blinked his one green eye and kneaded her scrubs with his tiny paws, claws catching and releasing in a rhythm that might have been contentment or might have been something else entirely. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks, punctuated by moments of deep unease. Every time the door opened, Maris found herself tensing, half expecting to see the mysterious woman return. Every phone call made her jump. She caught herself checking the parking lot through the window more times than she could count. Dashiell, meanwhile, seemed determined to explore every inch of the office. He climbed the filing cabinets with surprising agility despite his vision impairment, discovered that the trash can made excellent noise when knocked over, and attempted to eat a rubber band before Maris caught him. His clumsiness on his blind side was becoming more apparent. He bumped into furniture, misjudged distances, sometimes tilted his head so far to compensate that he looked almost upside down. But he was also remarkably smart. Maris watched him learn the office layout after just a few hours, memorizing the locations of obstacles and navigating around them with increasing confidence. He seemed to use sound in interesting ways, making small chirping noises and then pausing, as if listening to how they bounced back. Echolocation, almost, though that seemed impossible for a kitten. At 3 in the afternoon, the door chimed and Cormac Brennan walked in with his granddaughter Willa in tow. The 9-year-old was a study in contrasts, her grandfather's blue eyes, but her own wild energy, wearing mismatched socks and a t-shirt declaring her love for wolves. She spotted Dashiell immediately and gasped so loudly it made the kitten jump. "Grandpa, look, he's got different eyes." "Easy, Willa," Cormac said softly. "Don't scare him." But Dashiell didn't seem scared. If anything, he perked up at the sound of a child's voice, his ears swiveling forward with interest. When Willa approached slowly, hand extended, he sniffed her fingers thoroughly before head-butting them with approval. "He likes me," Willa breathed, delight transforming her face. "Can I hold him?" Maris showed her how to support his body properly, how to move slowly on his blind side so he could track her approach. Willa listened, with the intense focus of someone who took such instructions seriously, then carefully scooped Dashiell into her arms. The kitten settled against her chest and started purring loud enough to hear across the room. "He's beautiful," Willa declared. "I don't care about his eye. He's perfect." Something in Maris's chest loosened, a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. Cormac stood a few feet back, watching his granddaughter with an expression that might have been pain, or might have been joy, or might have been both. "Willa wants to volunteer here," he said quietly to Maris. "Her mother says it's fine long as I'm here with her. She'll need to learn the rules, how to be safe around animals." "We'd love to have her," Maris said, meaning it. "How about Saturdays to start? 9 to noon?" "I could come after school too," Willa said without looking up from Dashiell, who was attempting to catch her dangling hair. "I could help with him. He needs someone, you can tell. He's been sad." "How can you tell he's been sad?" Maris asked, curious. Willa shrugged as if the answer was obvious. "His face, and the way he's purring now, like he hasn't in a long time, like he forgot how." From the mouths of babes, Maris thought. Because Willa was right. There was something almost desperate about the way Dashiell clung to the attention, as if he'd been starved for it, as if he couldn't quite believe someone wanted to hold him. They spent an hour going over basic shelter procedures, showing Willa how to clean cages and prepare food bowls. Dashiell followed them around like a tiny shadow, staying close to Willa's feet despite the risk of being stepped on. Twice he misjudged her movements and bumped into her leg, but he didn't seem bothered, just adjusted his position and tried again. When they finally left, Willa made Maris promise 3 times that Dashiell would still be there next Saturday. Cormac lingered at the door, his weathered hands resting on his granddaughter's shoulders. "That kitten," he said, so quietly Willa couldn't hear. "He's good for her. First time she's talked this much since her grandmother passed." Maris nodded, understanding. Grief worked in strange ways, found strange outlets. Maybe Dashiell wasn't just good for Willa. Maybe Willa was good for Dashiell too. After they left, the shelter fell into its evening quiet. Maris was locking up, Dashiell tucked into a carrier for the trip home when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Dr. Raymond Hart hasn't returned my calls. His clinic says he retired 2 years ago. Left no forwarding address. Something is very wrong. IP." Maris stared at the message, a chill running down her spine. She looked at Dashiell, who gazed back with his mismatched eyes, and wondered what secrets were buried in his DNA, what truths waited to be uncovered in his impossible existence. The drive home took her through downtown Millbrook Creek, past the library where Isolde had once held readings on proper cat breeding, past Merritt's Diner, where locals gathered to trade gossip, past the old bank building that had been converted into boutique shops no one could really afford. The town glowed softly in the evening light, peaceful and familiar, unchanged by the strangeness unfurling at its edges. Maris lived in a small house on the eastern edge of town, a rental that had become home through time rather than intention. She carried Dashiell inside, set him up in the bathroom with all his necessities, and tried to ignore how empty the house felt, with just one tiny heartbeat besides her own. That night she dreamed of fire, of cats screaming, of a woman standing in the rain, watching and waiting. She woke at 3 a.m. to find Dashiell on her pillow, his small body pressed against her head, purring with that deep rumble that seemed to say, "I'm here. You're not alone. Neither of us is alone anymore." And despite everything, the mysteries, the danger, the impossible questions, Maris felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next few days developed a rhythm that felt almost normal. Dashiell came to work with Maris every day, installed in a large dog crate in her office, where he could see everything but remain safe. He watched the daily operations of the shelter with intense interest, his head swiveling to track volunteers and visitors, his good eye taking in every detail. His personality was emerging in ways that surprised her. He was stubborn, refusing to eat unless the food was arranged exactly so in his bowl. He was curious to the point of recklessness, constantly trying to escape his crate to explore dangerous places. He was affectionate in bursts, demanding attention when he wanted it, and ignoring all attempts at contact when he didn't. And he was smart, frighteningly smart, learning to open simple latches, memorizing schedules, recognizing individual voices before their owners appeared. But he was also vulnerable in ways that broke Maris's heart. His damaged eye was clearly causing him pain, making him squint and paw at his face. He startled violently when approached from his blind side, sometimes lashing out with claws before recognizing friend from foe. And there were moments, usually in the quiet hours, when he would curl into the smallest ball possible and make soft, sad sounds that had nothing to do with physical discomfort. On Thursday, Ronan Keyes showed up. Maris knew of him, of course. Everyone in Millbrook Creek knew of Ronan, the photographer who'd moved here 2 years ago from Portland, full of big talk about artistic vision and authentic rural life. He'd done a spread on the town for some lifestyle magazine, all golden hour shots of farmers' markets and artisan coffee shops that made Millbrook Creek look like a hipster fantasy rather than the struggling logging town it actually was. Then the magazine had gone under, the assignments had dried up, and Ronan had stayed taking odd jobs and nursing what everyone politely called his transition period. He arrived without warning, camera bag slung over his shoulder, explaining that he'd heard about the shelter's financial troubles and wanted to help. His idea, a social media campaign featuring the animals, professionally shot photos that would drive adoptions and donations. "It's win-win," he said, flashing teeth too white to be natural. "You get publicity, I rebuild my portfolio. I'll even do it for free. Just credit me on the posts." Maris's first instinct was to refuse. She'd learned to be wary of people who offered something for nothing, who showed up with solutions to problems they shouldn't know about. But the shelter was desperate, and Ronan's work was undeniably good. If professional photos could make the difference between closure and survival, what choice did she really have? "All right," she agreed, "but you clear every photo with me before it goes online, and you follow shelter protocols. No stressing the animals for a shot." Scout's honor. Ronan grinned and started unpacking equipment. He worked through the facility methodically, capturing the dogs in motion, the cats in artful poses, even the rabbits in their hutch looking dignified and adoption-worthy. His photographer's eye was evident in every frame. He knew how to use light, how to capture personality, how to make each animal look like a potential best friend rather than a shelter statistic. Then he spotted Dashiell. "Oh, now that's interesting," Ronan breathed, moving closer to the crate. "Different colored eyes and male calico. Do you know how rare that is?" "I'm aware," Maris said carefully, "but he's not available for photos." "What? Why not?" Ronan looked genuinely confused. "He's perfect. That asymmetry, the way he looks at the camera, He's got star quality. Put him online and you'll have people driving from 3 states away. Exactly, which is why he's not going online. Ronan's expression shifted, became calculating in a way that made Maris's stomach tighten. You're protecting him from something, or someone. When she didn't respond, he smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. I get it. Mysterious kitten, unclear origins. Very intriguing. How about this? Let me document him just for you. No social media, no public posting. Just beautiful photos that capture his story. You can keep them private, or use them later when whatever's going on resolves itself. Maris wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea, but Ronan was already setting up his equipment, and Dashiell was pressing against the front of his crate, clearly interested in the new person and all their fascinating gear. And there was a part of her, a small artistic part she usually kept buried, that wanted to see Dashiell through a professional lens, to have images of him as he was now, before surgery changed his face forever. Fine, she said, but only in my office with the door locked, and I keep all the files. Deal. The photo session lasted an hour. Ronan worked with surprising gentleness, letting Dashiell set the pace, capturing him in dozens of poses. Dashiell seemed to understand what was happening, actually posing sometimes, tilting his head to show his good side or his damaged one depending on some feline logic Maris couldn't follow. The camera loved him. Even she could see that. Every shot was striking, from the close-ups that emphasized his strange beauty to the wider frames that showed his small size and vulnerability. He's remarkable, Ronan said finally, reviewing the images on his camera screen. I've photographed hundreds of animals, and I've never seen one with this much presence. It's like he knows he's different and he's decided to own it. Maybe he does, Maris murmured, watching Dashiell clean his face with the intense focus cats brought to grooming. No, he's different, I mean. Ronan transferred the photos to her computer, packed up his gear, and left with promises to have edited shots of the other animals within a few days. After he was gone, Maris locked the office door and reviewed the images of Dashiell. They were beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. Every shot captured something essential about him, his intelligence, his vulnerability, his strange dignity, but they also made visible what she'd been trying not to see, how much pain he was in. In every photo, his damaged eye was squinted or weeping or both. His body language, when you knew what to look for, screamed discomfort. She called the veterinary ophthalmologist in Portland that Isolde had recommended. The earliest appointment was 3 weeks out, and the estimated cost made her vision blur. Even with Isolde's promise to pay, the logistical challenges were enormous. Dashiell would need to stay overnight, require follow-up visits, might have complications that would demand even more specialized care. Maris was still staring at the estimate when her phone rang. Isolde, sounding tense and urgent. I found Dr. Hart. Or rather, I found out what happened to him. He died 18 months ago. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. His widow sold the practice to a corporate clinic that liquidated all his files as part of the purchase. So the records are gone. Destroyed, according to the clinic manager. Company policy for materials more than 5 years old. Isolde paused. But here's what's interesting. Dr. Hart's widow mentioned that before he died, he was working with a woman on some kind of breeding project. He wouldn't give details, said it was confidential, but the widow got the impression it was something unusual, something that made him uncomfortable. Did she remember the woman's name? No, just that she wore expensive clothes and drove a silver BMW. The room tilted slightly. Maris gripped the edge of her desk, Dashiell's photos swimming on the screen. The woman who brought Dashiell here, she said slowly. She was wearing expensive clothes. She drove a silver BMW, and she's been back. I saw her watching the shelter the night I got him. Then we have our connection, Isolde said grimly. The question is, what was Dr. Hart doing for her, and why did she dump Dashiell if he's valuable? Maybe she didn't know he was valuable. Or maybe something went wrong with whatever breeding scheme she was running. Or maybe, Isolde said very quietly, Dashiell was never supposed to exist in the first place. After the call ended, Maris sat in her dark office, Dashiell asleep in his crate, and tried to piece together a story from fragments. A woman using a dead veterinarian stored genetic material to breed cats illegally. Male calicos born from this scheme, valuable but flawed, defective in ways that made them worthless to her plans. One kitten with a damaged eye, dumped at a shelter but not forgotten, watched from the shadows. But why? What was the end goal? What could someone possibly gain from breeding cats in secret, especially cats with a lineage everyone thought had been destroyed? Unless the lineage itself was the point, unless having cats that could be traced to his older park's famous bloodlines, cats that shouldn't exist, gave someone power or leverage or access to something she couldn't yet see. Dashiell stirred in his crate, made a questioning sound. When Maris looked over, he was staring at her with his green eye, and she had the uncanny feeling that he understood more of this than anyone gave him credit for, that somewhere in his small cat brain, he knew he was the center of something bigger and darker than either of them wanted to acknowledge. "We're going to figure this out," she promised him, "and we're going to keep you safe." Dashiell chirped once, a sound that might have been agreement or might have been skepticism, then curled back into sleep. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky, turning the mountains into dark silhouettes against deep purple. Maris locked up the shelter, carried Dashiell to her car, and drove home through streets where every shadow seemed to hide watchers, where every set of headlights might belong to a silver BMW. Saturday arrived with frost on the ground and Willa Brennan at the shelter door 15 minutes before opening. She'd brought a sketch pad and had spent the drive, her grandfather reported, drawing pictures of Dashiell from memory. The sketches were surprisingly good. She'd captured not just his appearance but something of his character, the tilt of his head, the intensity of his gaze. "Can I show him?" Willa asked eagerly. Maris brought out Dashiell, who'd been having a restless morning, pawing at his eye and refusing breakfast. But the moment he saw Willa, his whole demeanor changed. He chirped happily and head-butted her knee, then allowed himself to be picked up and cuddled like he hadn't just been hissing at every other human who came near him. "You're his favorite," Maris observed. "I know," Willa said with the simple confidence of childhood. "We understand each other." Cormac, standing in the doorway with his worn carpenter's jacket and perpetually sad eyes, watched this interaction with visible emotion. When Willa was distracted, showing Dashiell her drawings, he moved closer to Maris. "He's going to need surgery soon," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, his eye is deteriorating. The longer we wait, the more he suffers. And it's expensive." "Very." Cormac nodded slowly, his gaze returning to where Willa had Dashiell cradled in her arms, both of them examining the sketchpad with serious attention. "My wife," he said softly. "She loved watching things heal. Gardens, people, broken furniture in my workshop. She said healing was the most important work anyone could do." He paused, working his jaw like the words were difficult to extract. "I've been saving since she passed. Didn't know what to save for, just knew I couldn't spend it. Felt wrong somehow to use money on myself when she couldn't use anything anymore." "Cormac, let me help with the surgery," he interrupted. "Not all of it. I know Miss Park is covering that. But the follow-up costs, the medications, whatever else he needs. Willa shouldn't lose someone else she's gotten attached to just because adults can't figure out the money." Maris felt her throat tighten. "That's incredibly generous." "It's not generous. It's necessary." He met her eyes, and she saw in them a desperation that matched what she'd been feeling. "I listen to the sounds I make in my workshop, Dr. Thorne. Sawing and sanding and hammering, all destruction sounds really, just destruction that leads to creation. But you know what I realized? I haven't built anything new since my wife died. Just repairs. Just fixing what's broken." "Healing," Maris said softly. "Yeah, healing." He smiled, small and sad. "Maybe it's time I remembered how to do that." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Willa proved to be a natural with the animals, gentle but confident, unafraid of the messier aspects of shelter work. Dashiell followed her everywhere his crate allowed, calling out whenever she left his line of sight, settling only when she returned and narrated what she was doing. Around noon, Ronan appeared with printed copies of his photos. They were even more striking on paper, professionally edited but not over-processed, each image telling a small story. The shelter's social media accounts, he explained, were ready to launch with a posting schedule that would maximize engagement. "These are incredible," Maris admitted, leafing through the prints. "Thank you. Thank you for letting me do something meaningful." Ronan's smile seemed genuine this time, less calculated. Then his expression shifted. "Actually, I wanted to ask you about something. I got a weird call yesterday. Woman claiming to be a cat breeder said she'd heard I was photographing shelter animals and wanted to know if I'd seen any calicos, specifically male calicos." Every muscle in Maris's body tensed. What did you tell her? That I'd have to check with you before sharing any information about specific animals. She got pushy, offered to pay for any relevant images, which seemed sketchy as hell. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his call log. Number had a Portland area code. Want me to forward it to you? Yes. And Ronan? If she calls again, don't tell her anything. And definitely don't send her any photos. Wasn't planning to. He studied her face. This is about that calico kitten, isn't it? The one you wouldn't let me photograph publicly. I can't talk about it. Can't or won't? Both. Ronan nodded slowly. Okay, but Dr. Thorne, whatever's going on, be careful. That woman on the phone, there was something off about her. Not threatening exactly, but determined, like she was used to getting what she wanted, and our conversation was just a temporary obstacle. After he left, Maris called Isolde and relayed the conversation. The older woman's response was immediate and fierce. It's her. Has to be. The breeding scheme woman. A pause. We need to move faster. Get Dashiell's surgery scheduled as soon as possible. Once his eye is removed and he's healed, he'll be less recognizable. Harder to identify as one of hers. Isolde, we don't even know for certain he is one of hers. Don't we? Isolde's voice was sharp. He has my microchip, my breeding patterns, shows up right when someone starts asking questions about male calicos. Of course, he's connected to this scheme. The only question is whether she dumped him because he was defective or because keeping him became too risky. Maris looked through the window into the main area where Willa was showing Dashiell how to bat at a feather toy. The kitten was playing with focused intensity, his damaged eye forgotten in the joy of the game, and her heart twisted. I'll call the ophthalmologist, she said. See if we can move up the appointment. Do it today. And Maris, don't let Dashiell out of your sight. The urgency in Isolde's voice chilled her. You think she'd try to take him back? I think, Isolde said carefully, that someone who breeds cats illegally using stolen genetic material, who works with veterinarians willing to bend ethics, who calls photographers fishing for information, that person isn't going to let a valuable asset slip away without a fight, especially if Dashiell is evidence of whatever she's been doing. They hung up, and Maris immediately called the veterinary ophthalmology clinic in Portland. After some negotiation and the invocation of Isolde Park's name, apparently still prestigious enough to open doors, she secured an appointment for the following Wednesday. Emergency booking, the receptionist called it, reserved for cases of significant pain or rapid deterioration, which meant admitting that Dashiell was suffering more than she'd wanted to acknowledge. That night, she kept him home from the shelter, setting up a comfortable nest in her bedroom where she could monitor him. He seemed grateful for the quiet, spending most of the evening curled on her pillow, purring softly, but around midnight he started crying, small, heartbreaking sounds that spoke of genuine distress. Maris turned on the light and found him pawing at his damaged eye, which had started weeping clear fluid. She cleaned it gently with a warm compress, administered the antibiotic drops the veterinarian had prescribed, and held him until the worst passed. He clung to her, claws digging into her sleep shirt, body trembling. I know it hurts, she whispered. Just a few more days, then it won't hurt anymore. Dashiell made a sound that might have been understanding or might have been protest. His good eye found hers, and she saw in it something that looked uncomfortably like trust, the kind that made her responsible, that bound her to promises she might not be able to keep. She fell asleep with him on her chest, his too fast heartbeat matching her own, and dreamed of silver BMWs circling her house like sharks. Sunday brought unexpected visitors. Maris was working in the shelter office, Dashiell napping in his crate, when two people walked through the door. A man and woman in their 30s, dressed in the carefully casual way that marked them as from somewhere bigger than Millbrook Creek. The woman carried a designer purse that probably cost more than Maris's monthly rent. We're looking to adopt a cat, the woman announced. Specifically, we heard you might have a male calico. Every alarm bell in Maris's head started ringing simultaneously. Where did you hear that? Oh, you know, social media. Cat groups online. The woman's smile was bright and empty. We've been searching for months. Male calicos are so rare, and we're prepared to provide an excellent home. I'm afraid we don't have any male calicos available for adoption right now. Really? The woman's smile hardened slightly. Because we drove 2 hours based on information that you received one recently. A kitten with some eye damage? I can't discuss specific animals that aren't available for adoption, The man who'd been silent until now stepped forward. His smile was more threatening than his companions. "We're willing to pay, significantly above adoption fees. Name your price." "Our cats aren't for sale, sir. This is a rescue shelter, not a pet store. And even if we had the animal you're describing, I couldn't place him with you. Our adoption process requires applications, references, home checks. That won't be necessary." The woman pulled out her phone, showed Maris a screen displaying a substantial bank balance. "We can make this very simple. You have something we want, we have money you need. From what I hear, this shelter is about to close. Surely you can see reason." Maris stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Behind her she heard Dashiell wake with a startled chirp, heard him move to the front of his crate. "I need you both to leave. Now." "We're not leaving without that cat." The woman's voice had lost all pretense of friendliness. "You don't understand what you're protecting. That kitten is stolen property. He belongs to someone who's paid a lot of money to recover him. Then that someone can contact local authorities and file a report. But she won't, will she? Because whatever scheme produced Dashiell wasn't exactly legal. The use of his name was a mistake. Maris saw it register on both their faces, confirmation of what they'd suspected. "Dashiell," the man repeated. "Cute. Look, Dr. Thorne." He knew her name, which meant they'd done research. "You seem like a reasonable person. Why make this difficult? Give us the cat, take the money, everyone walks away happy." Except Dashiell. He's a cat. He doesn't care who owns him. Maris felt Dashiell press against the back of her legs, having somehow escaped his crate. She didn't look down, didn't want to draw their attention to him. "I'm calling the sheriff. You have 30 seconds to leave before I add trespassing to the report." For a moment, she thought they might push it, might try to force the issue. Then the woman shrugged, elegant and unconcerned. "Fine, but you should know, people who get between Vanessa Crane and what she wants tend to regret it." That's her name, by the way. The woman who's going to make your life very difficult if you don't cooperate. She pulled out a business card, set it precisely on the counter. "Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." They left without hurry, getting into a black Lexus with Washington plates. Maris watched them drive away, her heart hammering before she finally looked down at Dashiell. He was puffed up to twice his normal size, his back arched, his tail bottle-brushed, looking absurdly fierce for something so small. "It's okay," she murmured, scooping him up. "They're gone?" But Dashiell didn't relax. He stayed tense in her arms, staring at the door they'd exited through, and made a low sound she'd never heard from him before, something between a growl and a cry, pure distilled warning. Maris carried him back to her office, locked the door, and called Isolde first, then the sheriff's department. She described the visitors, their threats, the name Vanessa Crane. The deputy who took her report sounded skeptical, but promised to make a note. Isolde's reaction was more dramatic. "Pack a bag. You and Dashiell are staying with me until after the surgery." "Isolde, that's not necessary. They know who you are, where you work, probably where you live. They've already attempted intimidation. The next step is theft, or worse." The older woman's voice brooked no argument. "My property has security systems left over from when I bred valuable cats. Gates, cameras, the works. If Vanessa Crane wants Dashiell, she'll have to go through me first." "I don't even know you," Maris protested weakly. "You know I loved cats once. You know I lost everything. You know I'm helping Dashiell because I couldn't save my own." Isolde paused. "That's enough, isn't it? For trust?" It was, or it had to be, because the alternative was staying exposed and vulnerable, while people with money and resources closed in. That afternoon, Maris locked up the shelter early, left instructions with her volunteers, and drove to Isolde Park's house on the hill above town. The property was more estate than house, acres of forested land, a sprawling home that spoke of old money, outbuildings that had once been cattery facilities, but now stood empty. Isolde met her at the gate, entering a code into a keypad that looked military grade. As they drove up the long driveway, Maris spotted cameras, motion sensors, lights positioned to eliminate shadows. Expensive hardware for someone who claimed to want isolation. "I had it installed after the fire," Isolde said, reading her expression. "Paranoia, the therapist called it, but now it seems I was right to be paranoid." The guest room she showed Maris to was beautiful in an austere way. High ceilings, antique furniture, windows overlooking the valley where Millbrook Creek spread out like a quilt. Isolde had set up a large pen in one corner, complete with cat tree, litter box, toys. For Dashiell, she explained. He needs space to move around, especially with his vision issues. Maris released the kitten from his carrier, watched him immediately begin exploring. He moved more confidently here than he ever had at the shelter or her rental house, as if something about the space felt right to him. Isolde stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face carefully neutral, but her eyes tracked Dashiell's every movement, and Maris saw how her fingers clenched when he bumped into the leg of the cat tree, misjudging distance as always. "I had 23 of them," Isolde said suddenly. "Did I tell you that? 23 cats in the fire. I knew each of their names, their personalities, their lineages back 4 generations. I could tell you which queen produced the best temperaments, which stud through the most vibrant colors. I dedicated 40 years to perfecting those bloodlines. You don't have to." "Yes, I do, because you need to understand what you're protecting." Isolde moved into the room, settled into the window seat with the grace of long practice. "Calicos are special. The genetics that produce their coloring are complex. It requires 2 X chromosomes, which is why calicos are almost always female. Male calicos happen when there's a chromosomal abnormality, an extra X. They're rare, often sterile, sometimes have health issues, but they're beautiful, striking, valuable to breeders and collectors." Dashiell had climbed halfway up the cat tree, was now attempting to navigate to the top platform despite his limited vision. Each movement was careful, calculated, his whiskers working overtime to sense distances. "My lines were particularly valuable," Isolde continued, "because I'd managed to breed calicos with unusually vibrant coloring and excellent temperament, cats that were healthy despite the genetic abnormality. I had waiting lists 3 years long. People paid thousands for kittens, and someone wanted to capitalize on that," Maris said slowly. "Even after the fire. Especially after the fire, maybe, when your breeding stock was supposed to be gone." "Exactly. With my cattery destroyed, my lines extinct, any cat that could be proven to carry Whispering Pine's genetics would be worth a fortune. More than that, there'd be evidence that someone had access to my breeding program, my genetic material. There'd be proof of theft and fraud on a substantial scale." Dashiell reached the top platform, chirped triumphantly, and immediately set about grooming himself, as if the climb had been effortless. "So whoever created Dashiell," Maris said, "they're not just running an illegal breeding operation. They're essentially stealing your legacy, your life's work, and selling it. While I live in exile, convinced everything I built was ash." Isolde's voice was bitter. "It's quite elegant, really. Steal the genetic material, wait for the original breeder to disappear from public life, then profit from bloodlines everyone thinks are gone. No competition, no questions, just pure profit. Except something went wrong. Except something went wrong." Isolde watched Dashiell groom his face, his paw carefully avoiding his damaged eye. Maybe too many male calicos were born. Maybe the abnormality rate was higher than expected. Maybe Dashiell's eye made him worthless as breeding stock, so they dumped him rather than risk being connected to a defective product. But they still want him back. Because he's evidence. DNA evidence. If someone were to test him, compare his genetics to my old breeding records, assuming any survived, they could prove he came from my lines, could trace him back to whoever's running this scheme. Maris felt the full weight of it settle over her. Dashiell wasn't just a kitten with a damaged eye. He was proof of crimes, evidence of theft, a liability to someone powerful enough to send intimidating visitors and make threatening phone calls, and she'd promised to keep him safe, to protect him, to get him through surgery and into a life where he could just be a cat. "We need to call the police," she said. "Real police, not the local sheriff's department. State investigators. Maybe the FBI if animal trafficking is involved." "We will. After the surgery." Isolde stood, moved to where Dashiell sat grooming. Slowly, telegraphing her intention, she reached out and touched his head with one finger. He paused, looked up at her with his green eye, then pressed into the touch with a purr. Isolde's hand trembled. "He needs to heal first. Needs to be strong enough to endure whatever investigation comes next. And I need..." Her voice cracked. "I need to see one of my cats survive. Just one. After all the ones I couldn't save." That night, Maris lay in the unfamiliar guest bed. Dashiell curled against her side and listened to the sounds of Isolde's house. Old wood settling, wind in the trees outside, the distant hum of security systems. Somewhere in the house she could hear Isolde moving around, unable to sleep, pacing like she'd been pacing for 5 years. Dashiell made his questioning sound, the one that seemed to ask if everything was okay. "I don't know," Maris whispered, "but we're going to try." She woke at dawn to find Isolde already up, coffee brewing, wearing clothes that suggested she'd never gone to bed. The older woman was on her laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and photographs that looked decades old. "I found them," she said without preamble. "Old breeding records. I digitized everything before the fire, kept it on a cloud server I'd forgotten about. Look." Maris moved closer, studied the screen. It showed a family tree of sorts, cats with names like Whispering Pines Moonstone and WP Autumn Glory, colored boxes indicating coat patterns and genetic markers, and there, in a litter from 6 years ago, a note that made her breath catch. "Cryopreserved embryos. Dr. Hart, 14 units. 14 embryos, Isolde said grimly. "I had them frozen before I had the queens spayed. Insurance in case I ever wanted to continue a line. I signed the destruction order after the fire, but clearly they were never destroyed." Could 14 embryos produce however many cats this operation is running? If implanted in surrogate queens, absolutely. Each pregnancy could produce 3 to 6 kittens. 14 embryos could potentially generate 50 or 60 cats over several years. More if some of those cats were then bred traditionally. Isolde pulled up another screen, this one showing news articles about champion show cats. "Look at this. Over the past 2 years, 5 different catteries have produced male calicos that won major shows. 5 different breeders, no apparent connection, but all the cats have the characteristic markings of Whispering Pines lines. So it's not just one person, it's a network, or one person operating through multiple fronts. Vanessa Crane might be the tip of a much larger operation." Maris's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Last chance, $50,000 for the cat. Final offer." She showed it to Isolde, whose face hardened. "They're getting desperate. That's a lot of money for one defective kitten, which means Dashiell is worth far more than that to them, either as evidence they need to eliminate or as breeding stock they can still use. But he's a male calico, probably sterile. Probably, but not certainly. And even if sterile, his DNA could be harvested, his genetics studied, his existence exploited. In the right hands, one cat can be worth hundreds of thousands in genetic material and licensing fees." The scope of it was staggering. Maris looked at Dashiell, who'd followed her to the kitchen and was now attempting to steal a piece of toast from her plate. He looked so utterly normal in that moment, so perfectly cat-like in his food thievery, that the idea of him at the center of a criminal conspiracy seemed absurd. But the evidence didn't lie, and neither did the fear that kept Isolde locked in her fortress, or the visitors who'd threatened Maris in her own shelter. "Wednesday," Maris said firmly. "We get him through surgery, then we go to the authorities with everything." "Wednesday," Isolde agreed. 3 more days. Those 3 days passed in a strange suspension of normal time. Cormac brought Willa to visit on Monday, and the little girl spent 2 hours sitting with Dashiell, reading him stories about adventure and healing. Ronan called with news that the shelter's social media campaign was working. Adoption inquiries were up significantly, and several local businesses wanted to sponsor animals. The county's consolidation threat had been postponed, pending a review of the shelter's improved public engagement. Good news, in other words. The kind of success Maris had been desperate for just weeks ago. But now, it felt distant, less important than the small calico sitting in her lap, purring despite the pain in his eye. On Tuesday night, Maris couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the surgery tomorrow, all the things that could go wrong. Infection, complications from anesthesia, damage to the socket that might require additional procedures. Dashiell was so small, so vulnerable. What if removing the eye wasn't enough? What if the pain had deeper roots than they could see? Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and took Dashiell to the window. The valley spread out below them, Millbrook Creek, a constellation of lights in the darkness. She thought about all the people down there, living ordinary lives, unaware that just above them a woman who'd lost everything and a veterinarian who'd fled from failure were protecting a kitten who shouldn't exist. "Tomorrow your life changes," she whispered to Dashiell. "You'll wake up different, less damaged on the outside maybe, but different." Dashiell butted his head against her chin, purring. He seemed unconcerned about tomorrow, focused only on the present moment, the warmth of her arms, the softness of her breath, the simple reality of connection. Maybe that was wisdom. Maybe cats understood better than humans that change was inevitable, that damage was just part of living, that what mattered was who held you through it. A light came on downstairs. Isolde, also unable to sleep, also keeping vigil. Maris carried Dashiell down to the kitchen, where they found the older woman making tea with the precision of ritual. She'd laid out 3 cups, as if she'd known they'd join her. "I haven't done this since before the fire," Isolde said, pouring steaming liquid that smelled of chamomile and honey. "Sat up all night before a surgery, worrying about one of my cats. It's strange how quickly the fear comes back, like muscle memory." "Did you lose any in surgery?" Maris asked. "Before the fire, I mean." "One. A queen who needed a C-section that went wrong. I wasn't even there. I was at a show 3 states away. By the time I got the call, she was already gone, and I never got to say goodbye." Isolde wrapped both hands around her teacup. "That's what haunts me about the fire. Not just that they died, but that they died alone, terrified, and I couldn't save them. Couldn't even get to them, just had to stand outside and listen." Dashiell, sitting on the table between them, reached out and patted Isolde's hand with his paw. Not claws, just the soft pad, gentle as a kiss. Isolde closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I miss them so much. Every single day, I miss them." They sat in the kitchen until dawn, 3 survivors of different tragedies, bound together by a kitten whose existence was both impossible and essential. When the sun finally rose, painting the valley golden rose, Maris felt something shift inside her. Not hope exactly, but determination. Whatever came next, they would face it. Together. The veterinary ophthalmology clinic in Portland occupied the ground floor of a modern building that smelled of antiseptic and expensive equipment. Dr. Helena Martinez, the specialist Isolde had recommended, was a compact woman in her 50s with steady hands and kind eyes that suggested she'd seen every possible animal emergency and remained unflappable through all of them. She examined Dashiell with thorough precision, using instruments that looked like something from a science fiction film. Dashiell bore it all with remarkable patience, seeming to understand that these people were trying to help rather than hurt. "The cornea is completely opaque," Dr. Martinez explained, showing them magnified images on a screen. "There's scarring throughout, and evidence of chronic inflammation that's probably causing significant pain. The globe itself is intact, but the optic nerve is non-functional. He can't see anything from this eye, and based on these readings, he's experiencing near constant discomfort." "But removal will help?" Maris asked. "Removal will eliminate the pain source entirely. The surgery itself is straightforward. We remove the globe, leave the eyelid structures intact, and allow the socket to heal closed. The cosmetic result is actually quite good. Most people won't even notice unless they're looking closely." "When can you do it?" Dr. Martinez checked her schedule. "I have an opening this afternoon, actually. A cancellation. If you're comfortable moving forward today, we can take care of it now." Maris looked at Isolde, who nodded. They'd talked about this, prepared for it, but the reality of leaving Dashiell here, of letting strangers put him under anesthesia and cut into his face, made her heart race with panic. "He'll be fine," Dr. Martinez said gently. She'd probably seen that expression on 1,000 owners' faces. "This is one of our most common procedures. I've done it hundreds of times with excellent outcomes. Dashiell will wake up, spend tonight under observation, and you can pick him up tomorrow morning. He'll be wearing a cone and will need pain medication for a few days, but cats adapt remarkably well to monocular vision. Most compensate within hours." "Okay," Maris heard herself say. "Okay, let's do it." They had to leave him then, surrendering him to a veterinary technician who promised to take excellent care. Dashiell cried as they walked away, a sound that made Maris's stomach twist. She wanted to run back, grab him, take him home where at least they'd be together. But Isolde's hand on her arm stopped her. "He needs this," the older woman said firmly. "He needs to heal. That's more important than our comfort." The drive back to Millbrook Creek was silent, both of them lost in their thoughts. Isolde's phone rang twice, numbers she didn't recognize, and she declined both calls. Maris watched the landscape roll past, dense forests giving way to farmland, small towns appearing and disappearing like punctuation marks. "I used to love this drive," Isolde said finally. "When I was actively breeding, I'd make it once a month to pick up supplies. Sometimes I'd bring a cat or two going to shows. I knew every turn, every landmark. It felt like coming home, returning to Millbrook Creek." She paused. After the fire, I didn't leave my property for 6 months. Couldn't bear to. Every drive felt like abandonment. But you're here now, because of Dashiell. Because sometimes healing requires us to step back into the pain rather than hiding from it. They stopped for lunch at Merritt's Diner, the local institution where everyone knew everyone and gossip flowed faster than coffee. The moment they walked in, Maris felt eyes tracking them. Isolde Park, emerging from Hermitage, the veterinarian from the shelter, who everyone had opinions about, together, unexpectedly. Becky Merritt, who'd run the diner since before Maris was born, came over personally to take their order. Well, I'll be. Isolde Park, sitting in my establishment. Never thought I'd see the day. Hello, Becky, Isolde said coolly. I'll have the chicken salad sandwich. Still as warm and friendly as ever, I see. But Becky's smile took the edge off the words. You two causing trouble together? Or is this just a social call? Just lunch, Maris said quickly. Uh-huh. And I suppose that has nothing to do with the 3 cars with out-of-state plates that have been circling town, asking about a male calico kitten. Becky's eyes were sharp. People talk, Dr. Thorne. And when expensive-looking folks start asking questions about cats in a town where the only person who ever cared about breeding them is sitting right in front of me, I tend to notice. Isolde and Maris exchanged glances. What did you tell them? Isolde asked. That I run a diner, not an animal directory. But they've been persistent. Showed up at the library, the hardware store, even talked to some of the kids at the high school. Becky leaned in, her voice dropping. Whatever you two are protecting, you better do it good. These people don't seem like they take no for an answer. After she left to place their order, Maris pulled out her phone. 6 missed calls from unknown numbers. 4 text messages, each escalating in tone from polite inquiry to barely veiled threat. The last one made her blood run cold. We know he's in Portland. Don't make this harder than it has to be. They're tracking us, she said quietly, showing Isolde the phone. Or tracking Dashiell's microchip. Isolde's face had gone pale. The clinic. We need to call them. Tell them not to release information to anyone. Maris dialed with shaking hands. The receptionist at the ophthalmology clinic answered on the second ring, and Maris explained the situation as carefully as she could. That Dashiell was involved in a legal matter, that only she and Isolde were authorized to receive information or pick him up, that they should contact police if anyone else inquired. The receptionist's voice turned crisp and professional. Understood. We take client confidentiality very seriously. I'll put a security note on Dashiell's file immediately. But the damage was done. Someone knew where Dashiell was, knew he was vulnerable, knew this was their best chance to reclaim him. And Maris and Isolde were here, 40 miles away, powerless to do anything but wait. Their food arrived, but neither of them could eat. They sat in the diner, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of a small-town lunch rush, and tried to think of what to do next. We go back, Isolde said finally. Now. We park outside the clinic and we don't leave until we can take Dashiell home. What about Vanessa Crane and her people? What if they're waiting for us? Then we call the Portland police. We make this official. No more trying to protect Dashiell quietly. We bring in every authority we can find, and we make enough noise that whoever's behind this has to back off. It was a plan born of desperation, but it was better than doing nothing. They left cash on the table and headed for the door. They were halfway to Isolde's Mercedes when a silver BMW pulled into the parking lot, blocking their path. The woman who emerged was everything Maris had imagined, and worse. Vanessa Crane was in her early 40s, beautiful in an expensive, maintained way, wearing clothes that probably cost more than Maris made in a month, but it was her eyes that caught attention. Cold and calculating, the eyes of someone who viewed the world as a series of transactions to be won. Ms. Park, she said pleasantly. What a surprise, and Dr. Thorne, I've been hoping to speak with both of you. We have nothing to say to you, Isolde responded, her voice like ice. Oh, I think you do. I think you have quite a lot to say about a certain kitten that's currently in surgery in Portland. A kitten that doesn't belong to either of you. He was abandoned at my shelter, Maris said, trying to keep her voice steady. That makes him legally mine until another owner can be proven. Another owner like me? Vanessa smiled. I can prove it very easily. I have purchase records, breeding documentation, everything necessary to establish ownership. What do you have? A kitten you've been hiding, medical interventions you've performed without authorization, and obstruction of property recovery that's bordering on theft. Funny, Isolde said softly, Because I have genetic records proving that Kitten carries my bloodlines. Bloodlines I thought were destroyed 5 years ago. Which means someone has been using stolen genetic material to breed cats illegally. Someone like Dr. Raymond Hart, who worked for you and died very conveniently before he could be questioned. Vanessa's smile flickered. Careful, Ms. Park. That sounds like an accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. And when we turn Dashiell over to authorities along with DNA evidence and breeding records, they'll trace him right back to you and whatever operation you've been running. You can't prove anything, can't I? Isolde pulled out her phone, showed Vanessa a screen. I've already sent everything to my lawyer. Breeding records, genetic markers, the connection to Dr. Hart. If anything happens to us, to Dashiell, or to Dr. Thorne's shelter, it all goes to state investigators and the media. Your whole enterprise collapses, and you'll be lucky if you only face civil penalties. For the first time, Vanessa's composure cracked. You don't know what you're interfering with. There are people involved in this who make me look kind. Then they should have been more careful about dumping evidence at shelters. Isolde stepped forward, and despite being decades older and several inches shorter than Vanessa, she somehow seemed larger. I lost 23 cats in a fire. I spent 5 years thinking my life's work was ash, and now I find out someone was profiting from it the whole time, breeding cats in secret, exploiting what I built. So no, Ms. Crane, I don't care about your threats or your partners or your operation. I care about one small calico kitten who deserves better than being a commodity in your scheme. Vanessa stared at her for a long moment, then laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You really don't get it, do you? Dashiell isn't special. He's one of dozens we've produced. Defective stock, damaged goods. I dumped him because he was worthless, and the only reason I want him back is because he's evidence I can't afford to leave loose. Kill him, keep him, I don't care. But know this, there are 20 more just like him, all sold to wealthy collectors who don't ask questions. Your precious bloodlines have been thoroughly commercialized, Ms. Park. Your legacy is profit in someone else's account. She got back in her BMW and drove away, leaving Maris and Isolde standing in the diner parking lot, stunned into silence. 20 more, Isolde whispered. 20 more cats suffering who knows what conditions, bred in secret, sold like products. We have to tell someone. Federal authorities, animal welfare organizations, someone. We will. But first, Isolde's voice turned fierce. First we save the one we can reach. They made it back to Portland in record time, parking outside the veterinary clinic with a clear view of all entrances. Isolde called her lawyer, a woman named Grace who apparently thrived on complicated animal cases. Within an hour, Grace had contacted Portland police, filed official reports about harassment and threats, and put the clinic on alert about potential interference. When Dr. Martinez called at 6 p.m. to report that Dashiell's surgery had gone perfectly and he was resting comfortably, Maris felt tears of relief streaming down her face. "Can we see him?" she asked. "Visiting hours are over, but given the circumstances," Grace explained, "I'm making an exception. Come around to the back entrance and we'll let you in." Dashiell looked tiny and fragile in his recovery cage, a cone around his neck, his left eye socket covered with neat bandages. He was still groggy from anesthesia, but when he heard Maris's voice, his remaining eye opened. He made a sound, not quite a meow, more a statement of recognition, and tried to stand. "Easy, sweetheart," Maris murmured, reaching through the cage bars to touch his paw. "You're okay, it's over." Isolde stood beside her, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears silent on her cheeks. "He looks so small." "He is small. Too small for everything he's been through." Dr. Martinez adjusted the IV line, delivering pain medication. "But he's strong. Cats are remarkable survivors." They stayed until the clinic closed, then drove back to Millbrook Creek in the dark, both exhausted and wired simultaneously. Isolde's house had never looked so welcoming, its lights visible from miles away, a beacon promising safety. But when they pulled through the gate, they found Cormac Brennan's truck parked in the driveway, the old carpenter pacing beside it, with barely contained agitation. "Someone tried to break into the shelter," he said without preamble. "Triggered the alarm around 4 p.m. Sheriff's department responded, but whoever it was got away. They did significant damage to the office door, though. Looks like they were searching for something." "Dashiell's medical records," Maris said immediately. "They wanted proof he'd been there, documentation they could use." "I secured everything," Cormac continued. "Boarded up the damaged door, changed the alarm codes, added some additional locks I had in the workshop. But Dr. Thorne, this is escalating. Whatever you're involved in, it's dangerous. I know. Maris felt the full weight of it crushing down. I'm sorry. I never meant for the shelter to be targeted. I'm not worried about the shelter. Cormac's voice was rough with emotion. I'm worried about you, and about that kitten who Willa hasn't stopped talking about since she met him. She asked me today if we could adopt him. Said he needs a family. The three of them stood in the driveway, cold wind cutting through their clothes, and shared the same thought. Dashiell was the catalyst, but they were all invested now, all connected to his survival in ways that went beyond professional obligation. He can't be adopted yet, Isolde said finally. Not until this is resolved. But after we've dealt with Vanessa Crane and whoever's behind her, maybe we can talk about permanent placement. Cormac nodded slowly. Willa will want to help. With his recovery, I mean. She's good with hurt things. Gets it from her grandmother. After he left, Maris and Isolde went inside, both too tired to talk, but too keyed up to sleep. They sat in the living room, tea cooling in cups they didn't drink, and waited for tomorrow when they could bring Dashiell home. I keep thinking about what Vanessa said, Isolde murmured. About 20 more cats, 20 more pieces of my legacy, stolen and sold. We'll find them, Maris promised. Once we turn over all the evidence, authorities will investigate. They'll track down where those cats went, shut down the operation. But will they? These are wealthy collectors, people with resources and lawyers. And the cats themselves. They're evidence of crimes, yes, but they're also living creatures who've been placed in homes. What happens to them? It was a good question, without a good answer. The legal system wasn't designed for situations like this, where victims were animals with no voice, where evidence had heartbeats and needed food and love. One problem at a time, Maris said finally. Tomorrow we get Dashiell, then we go to authorities, then we fight whatever comes next. Together, Isolde added. Together. Morning brought mixed news. Dashiell had made it through the night without complications and was ready for discharge. But Grace, Isolde's lawyer, called with a warning. Vanessa Crane had filed a counterclaim, alleging that Dashiell was stolen property and demanding his immediate return. She'd produced documentation that looked legitimate. Purchase agreements, veterinary records, even genetic testing that supposedly proved ownership. It's all fabricated, Isolde said flatly when Grace explained the situation. Has to be, but proving it will take time. How much time? Maris asked. Weeks, maybe months. The court will want independent verification of the genetic claims, assessment of Dashiell's origins, investigation into Dr. Hart's involvement. Meanwhile, they might order Dashiell held in neutral custody pending resolution. No, the word came out fiercer than Maris intended. He's not going into foster care or some court-appointed facility. He just had surgery. He needs familiar people, stable environment, proper medical care. I agree, Grace said, and I'll argue that. But be prepared for the possibility that you might have to surrender him temporarily. They picked up Dashiell in grim silence, signing discharge papers that included detailed aftercare instructions. He looked better than Maris expected. Alert, interested in his surroundings despite the cone, his remaining eye bright and clear. The bandages over his left socket were neat and clean, hiding the surgery site. Dr. Martinez handed over pain medication and antibiotics. He'll need the cone for 2 weeks until the sutures dissolve. The socket will look strange as it heals, sunken, maybe some discharge, but that's normal. Bring him back if there's swelling, bleeding, or if he seems to be in significant pain. Dashiell protested the car ride with loud complaints, clearly annoyed by the cone and the lingering effects of anesthesia. But once they got back to Isolde's house and settled him in the guest room, he relaxed visibly. He explored his pen carefully, learning how the cone affected his spatial awareness, then curled up in Maris's lap and purred. You did so well, Maris told him, scratching under his chin where the cone prevented him from reaching. Such a brave boy. Willa arrived that afternoon, brought by Cormac with a handmade welcome home banner and a bag of toys she'd selected specifically for cats with vision challenges. She'd researched it, her grandfather explained, found articles about how to help partially sighted cats, what toys worked best, how to make environments safer. I want him to be happy, Willa said seriously, sitting cross-legged in front of Dashiell's pen, even if his face is different now. But Dashiell's face wasn't that different, really. The bandages covered most of the surgical site, and from the right angle, he looked like any other calico kitten with a cone. Annoyed, slightly pathetic, but fundamentally himself. It was only when he turned his head and the absence of his left eye became apparent that you saw the change. Saw that he was permanently, visibly altered. Willa reached through the pen bars, let Dashiell sniff her fingers thoroughly. "Does it hurt?" "Not like it did before," Maris said. "The surgery took away the pain. Now he's just healing." "Good, because he has important things to do. Grandpa says he's in some kind of trouble, that bad people want him. Is that true?" Maris looked at Cormac, who shrugged apologetically. She asked directly. "I'm not going to lie to her." "It's true," Isolde said, surprising everyone by answering. "There are people who see Dashiell as property rather than a living creature. They want him back because he represents money to them, but we're not going to let that happen." "How are you going to stop them?" Willa asked with the directness of childhood. "By telling the truth, by documenting everything, by making sure the right authorities know what's happening." Isolde moved to sit beside Willa, her movements careful. "Sometimes the only way to fight powerful people is with information they can't suppress." Willa considered this, then nodded. "Like in stories, when the hero has to expose the villain's plan. Exactly like that. Then I'll help. I can draw pictures of Dashiell who document evidence, and I can write down everything I remember about when we first met him, in case that's important later." It probably wasn't important, legally speaking. But the fierce determination in Willa's voice, the need to contribute something meaningful, made Maris's throat tight. "That would be very helpful," she said. "Thank you." They spent the rest of the afternoon in unexpected peace. Willa drew while Dashiell napped. Cormac and Isolde talked quietly about security upgrades for both the shelter and Isolde's property. Maris monitored Dashiell's vital signs, administered medications, and tried not to think about court dates and custody battles and everything that could still go wrong. When the Brennans finally left, Willa made Maris promise to call if Dashiell needed anything. "Even in the middle of the night," she insisted. "Grandpa and I can help." After they were gone, Isolde poured wine for herself and Maris, and they settled in the living room with Dashiell between them. The kitten was restless, clearly annoyed by the cone, pawing at it periodically with increasing frustration. "He's going to hate the next 2 weeks," Maris observed, "but he'll survive them. That's what matters." Isolde sipped her wine, staring into the fireplace where flames danced and crackled. "I've been thinking about what comes next. After we resolve the legal situation, after Dashiell heals, what happens to him long term? I assumed I'd keep him. Unless you—" "No," Isolde shook her head firmly. "I can't. I'm not ready to be solely responsible for a cat again. The fear is still too strong. But I was thinking, what if he stayed at the shelter permanently? Not as an adoptable animal, but as a resident cat. Educational ambassador, therapy animal, whatever title makes it work legally. He could help other traumatized animals adjust, could be visible proof that damage doesn't mean worthless." Maris felt the rightness of it settle over her. He'd be perfect for that, especially with his story. Abandoned because he was defective but becoming something important anyway. We'd have to be careful about his safety. Security measures, limited public access, maybe changing his name to protect his identity from anyone still looking. But he'd have purpose, and people who love him. Willa, Cormac, the volunteers. He'd belong somewhere. Exactly. Isolde leaned down, ran one finger gently along Dashiell's back. He shifted toward the touch, purring despite his discomfort. He'd be home. They sat in comfortable silence until Dashiell's medication made him drowsy enough to sleep. Maris carried him up to the guest room, settled him in his pen with soft blankets and a heating pad. He circled once, twice, then curled up with his tail over his nose in the universal cat position of contentment. "Sleep well," Maris whispered. "Tomorrow we start fighting back." But tomorrow began with chaos. At 6 a.m., Grace called with urgent news. Vanessa Crane had escalated her legal claims, filing for emergency custody of Dashiell and producing a witness, a veterinary technician who'd allegedly worked with Dr. Hart and would testify that Dashiell had been stolen from Crane's legitimate breeding program. The hearing was scheduled for that afternoon in Portland. "It's a trap," Isolde said immediately. "She's fabricated everything to force us into court unprepared." "Maybe," Grace agreed, "but we still have to respond. If you don't show up with Dashiell, the judge can issue a bench warrant and you'll lose him by default." They had 4 hours to prepare. Grace walked them through what to expect. what questions would be asked, what documentation they needed. Maris gathered Dashiell's medical records, the microchip registration, photos of the day he'd been abandoned. Isolde compiled her breeding records, the evidence of Dr. Hart's death, everything connecting Vanessa to the illegal operation. The drive to Portland felt like traveling to battle. Dashiell, still wearing his cone, meowed plaintively from his carrier in the back seat. He didn't understand why they kept moving him around, why nothing was stable, why the world had become a series of disruptions. "I know," Maris told him. "I'm sorry. Just a little longer." The courthouse was downtown, all grey stone and institutional authority. They met Grace in the lobby, a black woman in her 50s with silver locks and the kind of presence that suggested she did not lose cases lightly. "The hearing is in Judge Nakamura's courtroom," she explained. "She's fair, but strict. She won't tolerate emotional appeals or unsupported claims. Everything needs documentation, precedent, legal foundation." "What about Vanessa's witness?" Isolde asked. "I'll handle that. I've already filed for copies of any employment records, witness statements, proof of their claimed relationship to Dr. Hart. If they can't produce documentation, their testimony is suspect." The courtroom was smaller than Maris expected, and nearly empty except for essential parties. Vanessa Crane sat on one side with two lawyers who looked expensive and confident. She was dressed in a designer suit that screamed money, her expression composed and vaguely sympathetic, like she was the victim here. When the bailiff called the case, Judge Nakamura entered with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd presided over thousands of hearings. She was a Japanese-American woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue everything at once. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding custody of one Dashiell, male calico kitten," she began. "Ms. Crane, you're claiming ownership and requesting immediate return of property. Dr. Thorne, you're contesting on grounds that the animal was legally abandoned at your facility. Ms. Park, you're claiming the animal was bred using your stolen genetic material. Is that correct?" 3 agreements. "This is already more complicated than standard animal custody disputes." Judge Nakamura looked at her notes. "Ms. Crane, present your evidence." Vanessa's lead lawyer stood, a man named Mitchell who spoke with practiced smoothness. "Your Honor, my client purchased breeding rights and genetic material from Dr. Raymond Hart prior to his death. This material included embryos from Ms. Park's former cattery. Ms. Crane paid substantial fees for legal transfer of ownership and breeding authorization. Dashiell is a product of those embryos, making him rightfully my client's property. Do you have documentation of this purchase?" Mitchell produced a folder, handed it to the bailiff who delivered it to the judge. Maris watched Judge Nakamura's face as she reviewed the papers, her expression giving nothing away. "These contracts appear properly executed," the judge noted. "However, they're dated after the fire that destroyed Whispering Pines cattery. Ms. Park, did you sell or transfer breeding rights to Ms. Crane at any point?" Isolde stood with dignity. "Absolutely not, Your Honor. I signed destruction orders for all genetic material after the fire. I never authorized sales, transfers, or continued use of my bloodlines. Yet these contracts bear your signature. They're forged, Your Honor. I can provide handwriting analysis, testimony from my lawyer, who witnessed the actual destruction orders, banking records showing I received no payments from Ms. Crane." Judge Nakamura made notes. "We'll need to verify that. In the meantime, Dr. Thorne, explain how you came into possession of this animal." Maris stood, her legs unsteady. "A woman brought him to my shelter on October 15th, Your Honor. She refused to provide her name or fill out surrender forms. She said he was defective and too ugly to sell, then left before I could get more information. I scanned him for a microchip and found it registered to Ms. Park's former cattery, which seemed impossible since that facility had been closed for 5 years. Did you attempt to locate the original owner?" "I contacted Ms. Park immediately. She had no knowledge of this kitten's existence. We've been investigating since then, trying to determine his origins." "And you performed surgery on the animal?" "Yes, Your Honor. He was in significant pain from a damaged eye that required removal. Ms. Park agreed to fund the procedure since she had concerns about his connection to her bloodlines." "Ms. Crane, were you the woman who brought Dashiell to Dr. Thorne's shelter?" "Absolutely not, Your Honor." Vanessa's voice was smooth as silk. "I would never abandon valuable property. What likely happened is that Dashiell was stolen from my breeding facility and dumped at the shelter by the thief. I've been searching for him ever since." Do you have a police report documenting this theft? A flicker of hesitation. Not a formal report, no. I attempted to recover him privately to avoid public attention that might harm my breeding program's reputation. By sending threatening messages and attempting break-ins, Grace interjected. Your Honor, I have documentation of harassment directed at Dr. Thorne, including financial offers that exceeded $50,000 for one supposedly ordinary kitten. That's not the behavior of someone seeking legitimate property recovery. Judge Nakamura leaned back, studying all parties. This case is far more complex than it appeared. I'm ordering independent DNA testing of Dashiell to determine his genetic lineage. I'm also ordering investigation into Dr. Hart's business practices and the legitimacy of any contracts he executed near the end of his life. Until those matters are resolved, Dashiell will remain in Dr. Thorne's custody, but neither party may move him outside of Oregon or alter his appearance further. Your Honor, Mitchell protested, my client has demonstrated clear ownership. What your client has demonstrated is suspicious documentation and concerning behavior. Until I'm satisfied that Dashiell's origins are clear and legal, he stays where he is. We'll reconvene in 30 days for final determination. The gavel came down with finality. They stumbled out of the courthouse in a daze of relief and exhaustion. 30 days. They had 30 days to prove Vanessa. Crane's operation was illegal, to document the theft of Isolde's genetic material, to protect Dashiell from being reclaimed. It's not over, Grace warned. Crane will use that time to shore up her documentation, possibly fabricate more evidence. We need to move faster than she does. How? Maris asked. By finding the other cats. If there are 20 more out there, as Crane claimed, finding even one would corroborate your story. Show a pattern of illegal breeding. They could be anywhere, Isolde said. Sold to collectors across the country, maybe internationally. Then we start with what we know. Cat shows, registration databases, genetic testing records. Somewhere there's a trail. That evening, back at Isolde's house with Dashiell safely settled, they began the real work. Ronan, hearing about their court appearance through Cormac, showed up with his laptop and offered his help. I know people in the cat fancy world, he explained. Photography contacts, show judges, breeders. If there are Whispering Pines cats appearing at shows under false lineage, someone might have noticed. They worked late into the night, cross-referencing show results with genetic markers Isolde remembered from her breeding program. It was tedious, eye-straining work that felt simultaneously crucial and futile. But around midnight, Ronan made a sound of discovery. Look at this. Male calico, shown 6 months ago in California by a breeder named Seraphine Dove, won best in show at a major competition. The judge's notes specifically mentioned the unusual color distribution and perfect temperament. And look at the photo. He turned the laptop so they could all see. The cat on screen was stunning. Larger than Dashiell, fully mature, but with an unmistakable pattern of orange, black, and white that echoed his markings exactly. The distinctive white blaze on the chest, the specific distribution of colors that Isolde had spent 40 years perfecting. That's a Whispering Pines cat, Isolde breathed. I'd stake everything on it. Seraphine Dove, Grace repeated, already typing on her phone. Interesting. That name appeared in Dr. Hart's old client list. She had embryos stored with him, supposedly for her own breeding program. Let me guess, Maris said. Vanessa Crane either is Seraphine Dove or they're working together. We need to verify that. If we can prove they're connected, prove this cat came from stolen Whispering Pines genetics, we have our pattern. How do we get genetic material from a cat in California? Ronan asked. We don't need to. Show cats have to register with official organizations. Those organizations often require DNA testing for valuable breeds. If we can access those records, we can compare them to Isolde's breeding data. Grace made calls while the rest of them continued searching databases. 2 more possible matches appeared, one in Washington, one in Arizona. All male calicos, all shown within the past year, all bearing the unmistakable stamp of Isolde's bloodlines. By the time dawn broke, they had the outline of something big. At least 5 cats that almost certainly came from the stolen genetic material. A network of breeders and collectors who'd paid premium prices for cats that shouldn't exist. And in the center of it all, Vanessa Crane, operating under multiple identities, trafficking in stolen legacy. This isn't just about Dashiell anymore, Isolde said quietly. It's about every cat she's exploited, every line she's corrupted. My life's work, stolen and sold piece by piece. Then we stop her, Maris said firmly. We document everything. We go to federal authorities with evidence of interstate trafficking and fraud. We make enough noise that she can't operate in shadows anymore. Dashiell, awake now and demanding breakfast, meowed loudly from his pen. Despite the cone, despite his healing socket, despite everything he'd been through, he seemed utterly unbothered by the weight of the conspiracy swirling around him. He just wanted food and attention, and maybe someone to help him scratch the itch under his cone. Willa arrived that morning with her grandfather, as she had every day since Dashiell's surgery. She'd made a schedule, she explained seriously, to ensure he got enough enrichment and social time during recovery. Today's activity, gentle grooming and storytelling. She settled beside his pen and began brushing his accessible fur with careful strokes, narrating a tale about a brave one-eyed cat who saved a kingdom through cleverness rather than sight. Dashiell purred throughout, clearly enjoying both the attention and the story. Watching them, Maris felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about winning a legal case or exposing a criminal operation. It was about proving that damaged things still had value, that imperfection didn't mean worthless, that one small cat could change everything by simply existing. He looks happy, Cormac observed, standing beside Maris. Despite everything, he looks genuinely happy. He is. I think he knows he's loved now. My wife used to say that was all any living thing really needed, to know it was loved and it had purpose. Cormac watched his granddaughter with obvious affection. Willa's been different since meeting Dashiell. More confident, less afraid of her own grief. That kitten gave her something I couldn't. Permission to be broken and still be whole. Maris understood completely, because Dashiell had given her the same thing, had shown her that fleeing her problems wasn't the same as solving them, that hiding in Millbrook Creek wasn't the same as healing, that sometimes you had to fight for what mattered, even when fighting felt impossible. The next weeks passed in a blur of legal preparation, investigation, and Dashiell's recovery. His socket healed cleanly, the sutures dissolving right on schedule. 2 weeks post-surgery, Dr. Martinez removed the cone and declared him fully healed. The change was remarkable. Without the cone's restriction, Dashiell's personality exploded outward. He was playful and affectionate, curious and bold, compensating for his limited vision with increased confidence rather than caution. He learned to navigate by memory and sound, memorizing room layouts with astonishing speed. His remaining eye seemed brighter, more focused, as if losing the damaged one had somehow enhanced what remained. And the socket itself, once the swelling went down, wasn't as jarring as Maris had feared. The eyelid had sealed naturally, creating a smooth surface that looked almost intentional. He was visibly different, yes, asymmetrical, in a way that caught the eye. But he wasn't ugly. He was striking. Memorable. Beautiful in an unconventional way that made people look twice. Willa declared him perfect, Cormac agreed. Even Isolde, who'd spent 40 years evaluating cats by exacting standards, admitted that Dashiell had a certain charisma that transcended traditional aesthetics. The legal battle intensified. Grace filed motion after motion, compelling Vanessa Crane to produce documentation she couldn't fabricate. The DNA testing came back confirming what they'd known. Dashiell carried genetic markers distinctive to Whispering Pines bloodlines. The probability that he'd been bred independently using different stock was less than 1%. Federal investigators became involved, treating it as a case of interstate animal trafficking and fraud. They seized records from Dr. Hart's widow, finding evidence that he'd been blackmailed into continuing breeding work after Whispering Pines closed. Vanessa Crane had something on him. They never discovered what, and had used it to gain access to genetic material he'd been ordered to destroy. The other cats were located one by one. Interviews with their owners revealed a consistent story. They'd paid astronomical fees for rare male calicos from exclusive bloodlines, receiving certificates of authenticity that turned out to be forgeries. Some had paid over $100,000 for kittens that had cost Vanessa nothing but time and stolen resources. But the breaking point came from an unexpected source. One of Vanessa's former associates, a veterinary technician named Marcus, came forward with testimony that buried her. He'd worked for the operation for 8 months before his conscience got the better of him. He described the facility where surrogate queens were kept, the embryos being thawed and implanted, the male calicos being born, and either sold or discarded based on perceived value. Dashiell wasn't the only one dumped, Marcus testified in a deposition Grace shared. There were 3 others with defects: blind, deaf, severe health issues. She told me to euthanize them. I couldn't do it. I drove them to different shelters instead, hoping someone would give them a chance. Maris felt her blood run cold. 3 more cats like Dashiell, abandoned because they weren't perfect enough to sell. Did you keep records? Know which shelters? Marcus provided addresses, 2 in California, 1 in Washington. Grace immediately contacted authorities in those jurisdictions. They found 2 of the 3 cats within days. One had been adopted, was living happily with a family who didn't care about his partial deafness. The other was still in shelter care, overlooked because of his small size and tendency to hide. Both were confirmed through DNA testing to be Whispering Pines descendants. The third cat had disappeared. The shelter had closed 6 months ago, its animals redistributed to other facilities or adopted out without complete documentation. Marcus thought this cat had been blind in both eyes, a white and ginger male who'd been maybe 6 weeks old when dumped. We might never find him, Grace said gently when Maris expressed determination to keep looking. The trail's gone cold. But we can't just give up. We're not giving up, but we also need to accept that some things can't be fixed, even when we want them to be. It was a hard lesson, one Maris struggled with, but Dashiell, curled in her lap and purring contentedly, was proof that some things could be fixed, that some cats could be saved, even if not all. The final court hearing was scheduled for late November, exactly 30 days after the first. The evidence was overwhelming. Documentation of theft, fraud, trafficking, animal cruelty. Vanessa Crane's empire was collapsing, her associates testifying against her, in exchange for reduced charges. The hearing itself was anticlimactic. Judge Nakamura reviewed the evidence, asked pointed questions that Vanessa's lawyers couldn't adequately answer, and made her ruling without hesitation. It's clear that Dashiell is not Ms. Crane's property, but rather evidence of criminal activity. Custody is awarded to Dr. Thorne, with Ms. Park having visitation rights and input into long-term care decisions. Ms. Crane is ordered to pay restitution for veterinary expenses and legal fees. Criminal charges will be filed by state and federal prosecutors. The gavel came down, and it was over. They walked out of the courthouse into cold November sunshine, Dashiell in his carrier, Grace beside them looking satisfied in the way of lawyers who'd won decisively. What happens now? Maris asked. Now you take Dashiell home. Live your life. Let the legal system handle Crane's prosecution. Grace smiled. And maybe consider what you learned from this, because I suspect you're not the same person who found a kitten in a box back in October. She wasn't. None of them were. Isolde had emerged from her self-imposed isolation, was talking about maybe, eventually, considering breeding again. Not immediately, not extensively, but perhaps a small program focused on health and temperament rather than show wins and profit. Cormac had started building the annex he'd promised, a special wing at the shelter for animals with disabilities or difficult histories. Dashiell's place, Willa had named it, and no one had the heart to suggest something different. Ronan had abandoned his pursuit of prestigious photography for something more meaningful. He'd been documenting Dashiell's recovery, the legal battle, the community's response, and was putting together a book proposal about animal advocacy and the real cost of pedigree breeding. And Maris had remembered why she'd become a veterinarian in the first place. Not for the prestige or the clean success stories, but for moments exactly like this, taking home a broken thing and giving it the chance to become whole. They held a celebration that evening at Isolde's house. Cormac and Willa came with a cake shaped like a cat. Ronan brought champagne and prints of his favorite Dashiell photos. Even Grace made an appearance, staying long enough to toast their success before heading back to Portland. Dashiell, the guest of honor, held court in the living room, allowing everyone to admire him. He'd grown significantly in the 6 weeks since arriving at the shelter, not quite full-grown, but no longer the tiny scrap who'd trembled in a cardboard box. His coat had filled out, glossy and healthy. His remaining eye was bright and confident. The socket where his damaged eye had been was completely healed, just a smooth surface that barely drew notice anymore. He was, everyone agreed, magnificent. What happens with him long-term? Willa asked. Does he stay with you, Dr. Thorne? He stays at the shelter, Maris explained. As a permanent resident and ambassador cat, he'll help other animals adjust, teach volunteers about working with special needs pets, and generally be spoiled by everyone who meets him. But he can come visit us too, right? Willa's voice was anxious. He's my friend. Of course, anytime you want. Isolde, watching this exchange, smiled. I think we've all become somewhat protective of our collective cat. He's special, Cormac agreed. Not despite his damage, but because of what he's survived. That kind of resilience inspires. They were right. In the weeks following the court victory, Dashiell became something of a local celebrity. The story of his rescue and recovery spread through Millbrook Creek, then to regional news, then to national animal advocacy groups. Donations poured into the shelter, more than enough to clear the debts and fund the new disability-focused wing. People drove hours just to meet the one-eyed wonder, as one headline called him. Families who'd been considering shelter pets came specifically to see Dashiell, then stayed to meet the other animals. Adoption rates tripled, but the real impact was subtler. Parents brought children who'd been bullied for being different. Adults who carried their own visible scars asked to sit with him, finding comfort in his unbothered acceptance of his altered face. People who'd never considered adopting a damaged animal found themselves reconsidering after seeing how happy and confident Dashiell was. He was, as Isolde had predicted, an ambassador in the truest sense, representing possibility, proving that perfect wasn't a prerequisite for valuable. On a cold afternoon in late December, Maris sat in her office, now fully repaired and upgraded thanks to the donation influx, with Dashiell sprawled across her desk, batting at her pen. Through the window, she could see Cormac and a work crew putting finishing touches on the new wing. Willa was there too, despite the cold, supervising with the seriousness of someone who took her volunteer role very seriously. Her phone rang. Isolde, calling from home. Marcus found the third cat, she said without preamble. The blind one. He's been living as a barn cat on a farm outside Seattle. The family that adopted him didn't know he was valuable or stolen or anything, except that he was good at catching mice by sound. They've agreed to let him stay there. They love him, apparently, but they want him checked by a vet and properly registered. That's wonderful, Maris breathed. All 3 defective cats, accounted for and thriving. All 3 proving that defective is a meaningless label. Isolde paused. I've been thinking about something. The 20-plus cats that Crane sold to collectors, most of those owners want to keep them. They paid money, yes, but they also developed relationships. Those cats are loved. That's good, isn't it? It is, but it also means there are Whispering Pines cats scattered across the country, carrying genetics I thought were extinct. Which raises a question. Do I try to reclaim that legacy? Breed seriously again? Or do I let it be what it's become? Scattered seeds that grew in unexpected places. What do you want? A long silence. Then, I want what Dashiell has. Not perfection, but purpose. Not recognition, but connection. I spent 40 years trying to create the perfect cat. Maybe the next 40 should be about creating happy ones. It was the right answer. Maris knew it in her bones, the same way she'd known to keep Dashiell, to fight Vanessa Crane, to trust in the possibility of healing. Come see the new wing tomorrow, she suggested. Bring your ideas for programming. I think we could use someone with breeding expertise to consult on our special needs animals. I'd like that. Isolde's voice was warm, almost happy. I'd like that very much. After they hung up, Maris looked at Dashiell, who'd abandoned the pen in favor of grooming his paws with the meticulous focus cats brought to cleanliness. You changed everything, she told him. You know that? Dashiell paused mid-lick, his green eye finding hers. He chirped once at that questioning sound he made when addressed directly, then went back to grooming as if saving the world was just another Tuesday. Maybe for him it was. The shelter closed early on New Year's Eve. Snow had started falling around noon, transforming Millbrook Creek into a postcard of itself. Maris locked up, Dashiell riding on her shoulder like he'd learned to do, his balance perfect despite the missing eye. They drove through town, past houses lit with warm lights and celebration, past Merritt's Diner where Becky was serving late dinner to a handful of regulars, past the library where Isolde had once held court as the town's breeding expert, past Cormac's workshop, dark now but full of projects waiting for spring. Home was the small rental house, unchanged except that it no longer felt temporary. Somewhere along the way, Maris had stopped thinking of Millbrook Creek as a place she'd fled to and started thinking of it as a place she'd chosen, a place where she belonged. She settled on the couch with hot tea, a blanket, and Dashiell draped across her lap. Outside, fireworks began at 11:30, the town tradition of welcoming the new year half an hour early, so families with young children could participate. Dashiell watched through the window with intense interest, his remaining eye tracking the colorful explosions. "Scared?" Maris asked, stroking his back. He purred louder, which she took as a no. When midnight struck, she thought about everything that had changed in 3 months. A kitten dumped in a box had become a symbol of resilience. A failing shelter had become a thriving community resource. A reclusive breeder had rediscovered purpose. A lonely veterinarian had remembered what she was fighting for. And somewhere in California, Washington, Arizona, and beyond, other Whispering Pines cats were living their lives. Some in mansions, some in barns. All of them proof that legacy was about more than bloodlines and show ribbons. "Here's to new beginnings," Maris whispered, lifting her teacup in a toast to Dashiell. "To broken things that heal, to second chances and impossible kittens." Dashiell chirped agreement, then promptly fell asleep, his purr rumbling against her chest like a tiny engine of contentment. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of possibility. There would be more animals to save, more fights to win, more days when she questioned whether any of it mattered. But there would also be moments like this, quiet, warm, full of the kind of peace that came from knowing you'd done something meaningful. Dashiell had taught her that, had shown her without words or intention that the difference between damaged and beautiful was often just a matter of perspective, that what the world discarded, love could reclaim, that one small cat could change everything, if someone cared enough to see beyond the imperfection to the irreplaceable creature underneath. Outside, the last fireworks faded to smoke and stars. Inside, in a small house in a small town, a one-eyed cat slept and dreamed whatever cats dream, utterly unbothered by the fact that his existence had rewritten several lives and exposed a criminal enterprise. Because in the end, he was just a cat. And that, Maris thought, settling deeper into the couch as snow continued to fall, was exactly enough.